Summer is a time of plenty. Sweet bounties that we look forward to every year. In the case of our raspberries, though, that doesn't happen without some diligent work in the early spring.
Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we're nothing if not diligent.
And today's episode is all about these raspberries. More specifically, 3 tasks that we need to do this spring to get the most out of our canes this summer. Hey, time's short as you know it is, so let's dive in. No doubt, just to mess with us, raspberries lead a dual life.
What I mean is, your raspberry patch at any given time will have 2 or more different kinds of shoots, known as canes, growing on it.
During the summer, you'll have the new shoots for the year, known as prima canes. Also, you'll have last year's prima canes that have turned into flora canes. They'll also likely be suckers, but let's focus on the prima canes and flora canes only.
When it's early in the spring, this year's prima canes have not come up yet, and we're only left with the flora canes. However, there are still 2 different types of shoots in our raspberry patch. Let me explain.
In raspberries, the flowers, and thus the fruit, really only appear on the second year shoots, the flora canes. And after they do, at the end of the season, those flora canes die.
And by the time spring rolls around, we're left with just the 2 types of flora canes. Last year's dead ones, and this year's that's going to bear all the fruit. Which is why now in the early spring is the best time to prune your raspberry patch.
As long as it's warm enough for the living shoots to have burst their buds, it's really easy to tell the 2 canes apart. Because one shoot is spent and dead, and the other one is growing and alive. Simply cut the dead ones down right at their base. It's quick work, and it shouldn't take you long.
One other type of pruning that is optional is to trim the tops of the really tall canes.
The shoots of raspberries tend to get really skinny and really floppy near the apex. Those clusters of fruit in the summer are going to be heavy, and if your raspberries are too tall, you run the risk of bending the stems or even snapping them. The rule of thumb is to cut them down to about 4 to 5 feet, but again, this is optional. Winter tends to do a number on our soils.
And our raspberry patches are no different, which is why right now in the early spring is the best time to build them back up.
And the best way to do this is by adding 2 things: compost and mulch. Simply pile in and top dress your raspberry patch with some nice compost. Level it off nice and evenly so it's ready to accept the mulch. Just like everything else with our garden, we need to protect that topsoil. And the number 1 way to do that is to mulch. Here I'm using straw because it's what I have, but you can use grass clippings, leaves, or even yard trimmings. Use what you got as long as it's organic, clean, and chemical-free.
With the patch all pruned, cleaned, and retucked in, spring is the number 1 time to feed your raspberries.
These guys can flower and fruit pretty quick. Not quite as early as strawberries, but still early enough that 1, we don't want to be feeding too close to that fruiting stage, and 2, we also don't want to use a nitrogen-heavy fertilizer. Go balanced, skewing slightly higher in potassium if you can. That's the last of the 3 numbers on any fertilizer label. There you go. 3 easy spring tips to get the most out of your raspberries this summer.
Giving you all the more time to check out the next episode of the Garden Quickie.
Thanks for watching, guys. And hey, if Garden Quickies are your thing, make sure to subscribe and click on this playlist here as we explore and solve more growing issues in 2 minutes or less.